person for 2.5 years. And for a lot of these victims, a lot of the similarities, there are things that are very similar to both human trafficking as well as domestic violence, as well, of course, sextortion and things like that in these crimes. So if you have a background in those, you'll have a pretty good understanding of what's going on here. So a romance imposter crime occurs when a criminal adopts a fake online identity using stolen images to gain a victim's affection and trust for financial gain. The criminals use the illusion of a romantic or close relationship to manipulate, groom, and steal from the victim, use their financial information, and eventually may enlist them as a money mule over several weeks, months, or even years. Victims can be recruited on dating websites, social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram. Online games such as Scrabble and Words with Friends are increasingly being popular. Sometimes they'll friend someone that seems like a friend already, because that could be somebody that's being victimized as well. So they're kind of all over, and they may even pretend to be affiliated with you in a religious way or some other way. They're very, very savvy at figuring out how to get to victims. The tactics of a romance imposter, the target and recruiting. First of all, the criminals control how they present themselves. They create these kind of idealized avatars using images of innocent people that elicit trust and intimacy. It might be pictures of someone in the military or a model. Sometimes they'll use even celebrities, and pretend to be the real celebrity, or just pretend that that's who they really are. These victims of image theft exploitation are also victims, and there's very few resources available for them. I'm kind of trying to work on that with some agencies, but you know, these are really a form of identity theft in many ways, and really also in need of resources and help. And if there's prosecutions, they certainly should be treated as victims. In targeting, the scammers will find or target a lonely person, usually 50 or older, often recently divorced or widowed. The perpetrators then are going to use chat rooms, social media, the friend requests, the dating sites, all of these to choose potential targets. They'll usually get victims off these platforms as quickly as they can and get them onto things like Google Hangouts or WhatsApp, different things like that, where they aren't really being monitored. They usually claim to live outside the United States, but they're often on work, doing engineer, construction work, off on an oil rig. Many of these people especially will pretend to be with the military and have images that they have stolen, showing that they're in the military or that they're doing some kind of humanitarian work. You know, I'm a doctor in Iraq, or you know, I'm with Doctors Without Borders or whatever, and those kinds of things. If it's a man that's a victim, oftentimes they're just a younger woman that is just very much in need, taking care of her family and having some really hard times, and kind of going after men in that way. They'll do things with both sexes. You can be gay, lesbian, whatever. You're still going to have opportunities to be scammed on these kinds of things. Oftentimes they may be widowers with small kids, or that's what they impersonate and pretend to be. Oftentimes they will mirror the experience of whatever the victim is that they're talking to have something similar. The seduction kind of thing is almost a kind of love bombing, is a term that I heard a victim use. It's kind of making a victim feel wanted. They're going to use really intense emotions, isolate and groom that person, kind of building intimacy through words. One of my victims' family members told me, Debbie, she'd been through 2 bad marriages. My mom is finally hearing the words that she wanted to hear all her life from this man, and she's not going to give that up very easily. So they make the victims feel wanted. It's really intense emotions. They may lavish victims with songs or poems or gifts. Often those gifts are paid for with credit cards or with the victim's own money that they're not realizing that's how it's being funded. But they give them a lot of words and lavish attention so strong that the victim almost feels like they owe them something for all this attention that they're getting. They may bombard a victim with text and emails at all hours and expect an immediate answer. And again, that's isolating and control, some of the same tactics used in domestic violence and human trafficking kinds of crimes. They're going to overwhelm victims within their intensity, which victims may eventually perceive as intimacy or love, but it's really just intensity. Whereas true love respects boundaries and other relationships at one time, these scammers don't have that. The financial requests, they'll test first with smaller amounts. They might escalate with the emergencies that are happening, requiring the victim to act quickly and not tell anyone. These might be business emergencies that they need money to help fund their business so that they can later be together with my victim. It may also be family emergencies or hospitalizations or accidents, different things like that, all that require money. Oftentimes there'll be a belief in that one true love, and that financial sacrifice is proof of that love, and it will allow that being together. And of course, it's only the victim that is making that financial sacrifice. Oftentimes they'll get a third party involved. This could be an agent, it could be an attorney, it could be a friend, and they're the ones actually doing a lot of the financial transactions. Again, going back to the criminal enterprise part of this. And they're kind of preying on that belief in a one true love, and that this is just somebody that you're going to have to grow old with. And the predators really know how to zone in on those kinds of emotions to get that. So they're going to also further groom the victim, if they can, once they've taken all the money that they can get from them, to be a money mule or involved in money laundering. And again, that's part of all that financial sacrifice, things that we have to do so that I could be with you. And we'll talk about money mules in a little bit. They're going to use coercion or threats and sextortion, identity theft, and other kinds of financial or cyber crimes once that victim is realizing that this is a scam and that this is a con artist. They're going to do everything they can in many cases to kind of keep that victim isolated and not reporting. Once they've identified as an imposter, they may also ghost the victim. They might reappear as a new potential suitor or someone that's going to help them to get their money back. They might even impersonate law enforcement. Or they may come back and say, oh, you got my true identity. Yes, I'm really a Nigerian kid, 16 years old, but I'm still in love with you. And I hope we can make this work out. So those are kind of some of the tactics that people will use. The ways that money can be sent to criminals. Wiring money, Western Union, MoneyGram were traditional ways. We're not seeing that as much as we were in the past. I think because of the major lawsuits, both with Western Union and MoneyGram by the U.S. Department of Justice, the Federal Trade Commission, and the postal inspectors. But traditionally, that has been a big way in the past. More and more, the scammers are using reloadable debit cards and gift cards, such as international now. For to ask Union, MoneyGram, and reloadable debit cards as forms of payment under the telemarketing sales rule. So if victims are on the phone for any kind of scam and the scammer is asking for those kinds of payments on the phone, that's another proof that you're dealing with a scammer. And I gave you where to access that law. Sending, receiving, and forwarding cash. They're still asking victims to do that. Maybe putting it in pages of a magazine. I had a victim that actually was told to send a stuffed animal because things kept getting sent back from Canada, couldn't make it across the border. And they finally told her to put it in a teddy bear, take out the seams and sew it back up and put the money in that. They're going to tell you to wire money through a bank, opening accounts or transferring the funds that you get. Again, being involved as a money mule. Purchasing or forwarding equipment, such as computers or cell phones. Being involved in reshipping scams, where actually they're buying things with stolen credit cards, having it shipped to a victim's home, and expecting that victim to send it further on, both to other victims, to money mules, maybe in the country, or actually off to another country. I've even had victims have to purchase night goggles and send them off to places, again, like Western Africa. Certainly not a normal kind of purchase. They're receiving counterfeit checks in which a victim cashes and forwards the money, and of course, victims being used as money mules that we talked about. Forwarding that money, traveling overseas, being used for drug or money transfers, or even people coming to your home to pick up checks or take you to the bank. Victims are all being used as those things. We are seeing a new trend where Bitcoin and alternative currencies are being used as a form of payment, and that's because it's very difficult, very, very difficult to track those things. And I gave you a picture there of just some Bitcoin ATMs, which you may not even notice unless you're kind of looking for them, but they are popping up in more and more places, and more of my victims of all kinds of these transnational scams are being asked to like put $20 in at a time for large amounts to get that off to the scammers. And you'll see that in many kinds of scams. Why are older adults targeted? There's an AARP study that said that people 50 and older hold 83% of the wealth in the United States. And this is a worldwide problem. They're not just targeting victims in the United States, they're targeting victims around the world. They also seem to be targeting people they perceive as financially stable, have a nest egg, sometimes excellent credit, may own their own home. In reality, many of the victims that they are targeting are experiencing financial insecurity already, and they're still being targeted. And unfortunately, those victims are still giving up their money, what little money that they have. There's often a history of prior victimization or adverse experience in life. For those of you that are counselors or victim advocates, that might be important information because they may need some help in dealing with earlier grief experiences or trauma. There can be cognitive and medical issues, mild cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, dementias, drug interactions, undue influence of all kinds. This is a form of undue influence, in my opinion. Loneliness, we'll talk more about that, especially during COVID or after the death or divorce of a spouse or someone involved in depression. The other thing is that often our victims don't understand the nature of the technology being used against them. We actually provide little education on transnational cyber criminal enterprises, or that we can't make arrests in foreign countries. Just some of those kinds of things aren't really well known. Victims are often on guard against violent crime, not the cyber and financial kinds of things, or they need to be aware on how to use and practice cyber safety things. Who is there to teach them if they don't have kids or grandkids that are there in their life? Who's teaching them tools such as blocking a cell call, how to pick up voicemail messages? I've had people recently retired, child protective and adult protective services worker, give me their cell phone when I'm out there doing kind of a home visit on them to see how they're doing. And I kind of assess, and they pick up every cell phone call that comes to them because number one, they don't know how to block a call or they don't know how to pick up their messages. So just making sure that the victims you're working with have those kinds of skills. You know, we may tell a victim to do a reverse image search using Google or TinEye, some of the things to find out if these pictures are being used are real or not. But often victims don't know how to cut or paste. So knowing those basic kinds of things in our messaging can be really, really important. And again, there's great need for hope and purpose and a way to feel important to a loved one again, someone to grow old with. And that's often why they're targeted for these and lottery scams and some of these other kinds of crimes that happen. Your world dies before you do. There was actually a New York Times article that talked about loneliness as a growing trend. We're seeing that even more, of course, with COVID. And it said that 1/3 of adults over 65 live alone, half of those over 85 are alone. And the second survey, the Scan Online survey, look at the numbers that I said. 57% said they had no close friends. 24% said they no longer felt important to anyone. Now, if you were a scammer coming in and wanted to target people, of course, the population that we're going to target are those 24% that said they no longer feel important to anyone. Because as a scammer, my job is to make myself feel important to you. And if I can do that, my chances of being able to steal from you are pretty good. There's also a study by Dr. Lichtenberg, and his studies on capacity and financial decision-making has data showing that 20% of older adults admit that when they do talk to others about money, it's out of loneliness. So if you're talking to a scammer, it may be because they simply want to talk to somebody, and that's what the scammer, of course, is trying to get the information on. There's another term that you may not, hopefully you know of, because I think it's the other thing that I often use in talking to some victims, but mostly family members and other professionals, and that's age-associated financial vulnerability. You know, I'm basically a social worker, but a long-term victim advocate. And what I found is that for diagnosis, it's not really important for me to know that much as far as what the actual diagnosis is of someone, whether it is a dementia or whether it is mild cognitive decline. But what I'm looking for are these patterns of age-associated financial vulnerability. And when I explain it to family members, they kind of go, oh, that makes sense to me. Yeah, he is a different person than he was 10 years ago or whatever. But what Dr. Lux and Dr. Hahn found is that it's a pattern of risky behavior related to money, placing that older adult at substantial risk for considerable loss of resources that might result in dramatic changes in their quality of life. And this is the really crucial part to me, that's inconsistent with the choices they made when they were younger. So if this is behavior that's different even 5-10 years ago, a good way I have of explaining the crime, and especially to family, is this age-associated financial vulnerability. I want to talk real quickly about some federal laws, and I'm going to go through this real quickly, but I have links to everything. One is the Senior Safe Act that was passed in 2018, which allows banks, credit unions, and I know you have some banking people there, insurance companies and others to report suspected financial exploitation of those 65 and older to agencies like APS or law enforcement without the threat of being sued if they're properly trained. This has been an issue in some states where there wasn't this kind of disclosure of information because of the Bank Secrecy Act. Now that information is allowed to be shared. The other one, and this is, you'll hear me referring to this kind of, and I love this act, and it's kind of the act that no one has ever heard of in dealing with elder abuse. It's the Elder Abuse, and it probably should be called the Elder Exploitation Prevention and Protection Act that was passed in 2016 for 2017, recently passed. Vulnerable adults are not included in this legislation, unfortunately. But I urge you to take a look at all the different factors. Adult Protective Services is mentioned a lot in there. Victim Services is mentioned as far as funding. The cooperation between local police and federal investigative agencies. The U.S. Attorney's Office in every district has to have an elder justice coordinator. I was talking to Casey. He's recommending that you guys invite your elder justice coordinator to attend your meetings. There's FBI victim specialists and FBI agents now that are being assigned cases involving elder fraud and exploitation. So there's going to be much different much more proactive than there was in the past on these kinds of cases. And they're actively looking for these. So it's a much higher priority than it used to be. Is there a federal law to report elder maltreatment or exploitation? If I had time with you in person, I'd have you raise your hand, say yes or no. Actually, there is no federal law to report elder exploitation or maltreatment. There is an Attorney General guideline, however, for Department of Justice employees to report it, unlike child abuse, which is mandated by federal statute. So wanted you to be aware. It's also a reason to invite, again, federal agencies to be a part of your multidisciplinary team. I've been a part of our FAST in Ventura County and one in Los Angeles County when they had it, probably since 2003. And I think it's really had an impact on the kinds of crimes and things that we've been able to educate our FAST on, and that our FAST has been able to educate us on. So again, just a suggestion that you think about including those folks, both as presentations and involvement. So what's happened as a result of that law? Real quick, and I'm not going to read everyone on here, but we've had these wonderful sweeps every year since the law was passed. And these are cases where the Department of Justice targeted federal crimes or civil actions in which these global criminals targeted victims aged 60 or older, or 50% of the victims were 60 or older. So you look at the first sweep, over 150 charged defendants. This is all over the world, causing over $500 million in losses to over 1 million victims. Well, one of the things that I get really upset about sometimes when talking to fraud researchers is they're kind of looking at the numbers of fraud, and they may or may not include transnational scams. But and here we're looking at both domestic victims as well as crimes that happen with victims here in the United States, but the perpetrators are overseas. But you can see the losses that we're dealing with. These are documented losses because these are indicted or charged cases. So we know these are the actual loss amounts. Second sweep, look, over $3.75 billion to over 2 million victims. Are you, as APS agencies and in FAST teams, seeing our federal victims in these kinds of crimes? My guess is probably not. A lot of them might be investment. A lot of them are going to be these kinds of scams, embezzlement cases, things like that. But the third sweep that was done this year was on money mules. And look at that, over 400 defendants were charged in excess of $1 billion in losses. Actions were taken to halt the conduct of over 600 money mules by issuing warning letters. And I gave you a website where you can learn more about those warning letters. They're actually being used out here in California, both by our federal agencies, as well as some of our local police departments have now started using them. So if they have kind of an unwitting money mule, they will give that letter that kind of warns them, you've been involved in being a money mule or a money mover, kind of explaining what that is. Even if they're an older victim, and then that information is kept on file. And there's actually a registry where those things can be kept. And if that victim again is caught being involved in money muling, they're actually being prosecuted. So that is one way they're starting to take care of this. How were the victims found? So there's two national or kind of international databases that I want to make sure you know about. And that's the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. And that's at www.ic3.gov. And the second is the Federal Trade Commission at ftc.gov. And for those of you that are law enforcement, especially sworn law enforcement, you can register to access both of these for free. And it tells you, I gave you the information on how you can do that. Those are wonderful investigative tools, so you can find out other local money mules, local victims, information on perpetrators you might be looking for on any kind of case. For the Internet Crime Complaint Center, the focus is on any kind of internet fraud. So again, great resource. You can find other detectives or agents that might be working a case. The Federal Trade Commission is more involved with all kinds of fraud as well as identity theft. And unfortunately, the two agencies don't talk to each other. So I'm always making a recommendation that victims report to both. But again, if there's one single thing that I hope you can do, it's try to get your victims to do that. I'm thankful that we have two APS agencies out in California that are actually filing out these reports themselves if the victims don't have family members able to do so, or if the victims kind of unable to do so themselves. Our APS are actually doing it. The documenting the financial details and the perpetrator information is really important on these complaints. You don't want to pretend, you don't want to be victim Casey who just says, you know, I had $10,000 or $100,000 stolen in this romance scam by a guy named John Smith. And not put any of the banking information or the wire transfer information, because that's what an agent or a detective is going to go in and do a search on, is that financial or perpetrator information. So I'm always telling my victims to think like a detective when you fill that out. Victims should download or print a copy because the only time they'll be able to access it. They can supplement it later with additional information. Anyone can fill this out for a victim. And victims may need help in completing that form. If you've got 20 or 50 banking transactions, that's going to be really hard for a victim. And I had a victim once tell me, you're asking me to visit my crime scene to do this. I can't do it. To go through and put every one of those transactions in, sometimes very, very difficult for a victim. So they may need help with that. But I can't urge you enough as a takeaway for any kind of financial case that you have involving these kind of scams. Please get those reports to those agencies, because as a result of that Elder Abuse Protection Act, things are changing and we're doing much more investigations. For example, this man Samola was sentenced to 27 years in prison in 2017 as a ringleader of a criminal organization in South Africa, victimizing women all over the United States and probably other countries too. He had been extradited from South Africa to the Southern District of Illinois, so he was brought back here. His exact losses were unknown, but he was ordered to pay $1.7 million in restitution. Over $200,000 in proceeds from the sale of properties in South Africa were ordered to be paid to the victims. His purpose was to lead each of his victims to believe he was her Prince Charming, her one true love, and the man with whom she was destined to spend the rest of her life. Some of the things that he did, he portrayed himself as a soldier, an engineer, who met most of his women on man. He showered poets, stuff, and chocolates. These scripts that these guys will use, you can actually take the word and cut and paste and find the scripts that are being used because scammers sell that information to each other and use them. Several women bought wedding dresses here. One victim had applied for credit cards, gave them cash advances of almost $100,000. She was one of 3 people at least that had filed bankruptcy. 2 victims considered suicide. Several lost their jobs and their homes. 2 women were induced to perform sex acts, which he recorded and published online. He told one by the time he was done with her, she'd want to kill herself, and he pledged to ruin her life unless he was paid more money. How were the victims identified? The way that these victims were found, again, is they had filed reports with the Internet Crime Complaint Center or the Federal Trade Commission. So once these victims are identified, we can get them help through agencies like the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the postal inspectors, different agencies like that. Very, very important to, again, do that. At this sentencing, the judge called it the most devastating crime one could imagine without laying hands or even eyes on another human being. Conspiracy, mail and wire fraud, and extortion hardly sound like the kind of crimes leading to broken lives. Devastation, desires to die, humiliation, and shame so extreme. His charms turned to bullying, name-calling, extortion, unthinkable demands and threats. Thoughts of paradise turned into thoughts of hell, and for some, thoughts of suicide. Dr. Monica Whitty, who is an expert on romance scams, I think she's now in Australia, testified that the victims have in many ways experienced potentially permanent life-altering changes in their lives. The long-term effects remain years and years and years later. How many of these victims are in our communities, and they really are invisible victims? This is usually where I do my little pitch about VOCA funding. The Victims of Crime Act funding originally was meant to be for all victims of crime. If you go back and look at the legislation, it kind of got turned around and used only by victims of violent crimes. And so these are the victims now that, for the most part, aren't eligible for things like crime victim compensation that would enable them to get the counseling that they need. And I find this is kind of a travesty because as far as the federal funding of VOCA, which comes from fine money that's collected from federal offenders, most of those offenders are financial and cyber offenders or businesses. And so it's almost like a taxation without representation where our financial and cyber victims are not able to, get access to the money that violent crime victims can get, often at their expense. So I'm working on big pushes and have been for years on trying to get VOCA to open up. And actually it has in many ways since the early 90s. It's just kind of up to the states to kind of decide to extend their help to these victims. So again, these are victims that often don't get the kind of help that they need because the funding is just not there. So Federal Trade Commission data between 2015 and 2019, almost 85,000 romance scam complaints, roughly the size of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Median loss, 2,600. Most of the victims, by the time it comes to our offices at the FBI or U.S. Attorney's Office, we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. I also posted here a Federal Trade Commission website where you can actually go in and explore data on your state to find out what kinds of crimes are being reported, what the losses are, which can be a really helpful thing in both for research as well as presentations. The FBI data on money stolen also 20,000 confidence or romance scams, 475 million in losses. And again, they can break this down by state as well. But I wanted you to see how this has been escalating. 2017, 211 million. And now we're up to almost $500 million just 2 years later. And of course, this is pre-COVID numbers for the most part. So you can imagine what it's going to be now. Possible impact, and again, I'm not going to go through each of these, but for any kind of my transnational scams, these are the kinds of impacts that we see on victims. And again, often invisible victims, because they're not victims that you're going to see usually a criminal justice system take place where there's going to be a local arrest, unless it's a money mule, which they might be involved in. But because these are international scammers, again, these are invisible victims, often no funding, no programs that are really helping them. Divorce and family alienation, especially if you've got those kids that have been talking to you for years saying, don't send money, mom, he's a scammer, quit sending that money, dad. A lot of them get alienated and isolated. The victims get isolated and their families aren't talking to them anymore because you know what? That's also their retirement money that they had hoped to get from their family that's going to the scammers instead. And they just get so frustrated in dealing with that person. Isolation, loss of home, bankruptcy, tax repercussions. I can't tell you the number of people that have given up their IRAs with great penalties to them in these kind of cases. I see that you have legal aid people on. Dealing with creditor intervention and things can be really, really critical for these folks. The quality of long-term care, decline in health, reputation issues, especially if sextortion or the threats of that are involved. The computer issues, many of folks have that, malware that's being installed. The shame, the guilt, the self-medication they may be doing, the risk-taking because as you lose this money, I have one victim, I had a call from a police officer yesterday, a detective. This victim has borrowed money and she owes it in 2 days to another family member. She's not going to have it to pay and she doesn't know what she's going to do. And there's concerns that she's suicidal because she's going to be unable to pay this friend back. Loss of faith in God, reduced desire to live, and yes, suicides and suicidal ideations. I'm actually collecting, have for years, the number of suicides that I found in using any kinds of scams like this, and unfortunately there's way too many. The other good thing that I think came out of this the Elder Abuse Prevention and Protection Act is the Office of Victims of Crime funded in about March of this year a National Elder Fraud Hotline. And if you don't know about it, besides the Internet Crime Complaint Center and the Federal Trade Commission, this is your other great takeaway. For any kind of crime like this, where you've got an international scam or you've got embezzlement frauds, any kinds of fraud issues, even with family exploitation or trusted professionals, you can have a victim talk to the National Elder Fraud Hotline. And you can have, they have different camera-ready things, so you can actually have this put on your website. If you go onto their website, it shows you how you can link so that you can add this. I'm encouraging police departments, APS, victim services, mental health folks, anybody to get this on your site. As you see, they don't have banker hours. They're open 6 to 11 p.m. Eastern time, 7 days a week. So I kind of say they have scammer hours, but it's a great resource. And they do a good job on presentations as well. So it might be a good presentation topic for you. But great help by professionals that can help in many ways and will actually help victims fill out the IC3 and FTC complaints and will really follow up with them. I've been really impressed with the victims that I've sent this to, and my APSs are starting to use it more and more as well as police departments. So what's a money mule? Victims are often recruited to be money mules. I prefer the term money movers because I think it makes more sense to my victims. But that's a person who's recruited and groomed by the scam predators to serve as an intermediary to accept and further transfer stolen property, funds, or drugs. How are they recruited? It can be online ads such as Craigslist. They could be active fraud victims such as those victims involved in work at home schemes, including reshipping, where again, money usually purchasing goods with stolen credit cards comes to your home and your job is to ship those out, not often realizing that it's stolen funds. Employment scams, lotteries, online dating scams. Also, who works as a mule, it can be really anyone, but criminals seem to target and recruit sometimes college students looking for money, adults with disabilities, those who are unemployed, criminal gangs, military spouses, older adults, especially who have been involved as victims, and previous criminals. The mules may or may not be aware that they're being used, and we often use the terms witting or unwitting. Their function is to transfer, again, this money to insulate the fraudsters, making it difficult to identify the criminal. They're being prosecuted in both the United States, locally and federally, and it is a form of money laundering. And I mentioned the cease and desist letters that are being used. Oftentimes, these international scammers have cells of people that might be family members, friends. The Black Axe organization, I think, is very involved, but they've got cells in the United States. So these money mules often are witting money mules, which is how a lot of these scams are being able to kind of be continued. And there is a place for local law enforcement and local victim services and local prosecutors to be involved in these, where you've got local money mules working. The last case I had in Los Angeles, they had, I think, 88 people charged, and it went all the way to Nigeria and Ghana, which is where a lot of these kind of crimes are focused, although they're spreading now, places like Malaysia, Thailand, really all over. But this started out with just a local kind of looking at one person that they believed to be a money mule in Los Angeles, and it ended up in this 88 major indictment on a case involving romance scam victims and BEC crimes. So let's listen to what a romance scam victim who was turned into a money mule has to say.
Roses, 12 dozen red roses. And then the next thing that he sent to me was an Easter basket. Heartwarming. I thought, okay, this guy's genuine. He's genuinely kind and sweet, very nice looking. My sister says, "So why don't you try online dating?" I'm like, okay, why not? And that's how it started. His name was Kenneth. He was in Nigeria building a shopping mall. He would start these words that, "Oh honey, I love you. I miss you. I trust you." When the package arrived, I was very surprised. They had packets of money orders. He gave me a list online to mail such and such amount of money to his suppliers. And I did that. I said, something's gotta be wrong. Why doesn't he have somebody doing this, like an accountant? I went in there to my bank. I asked them if this check was counterfeit, and they said yes. My heart was in pain. There's not a day or a night that goes by where I just want to say, I want to call these people up and say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what this person not only did to me, but did to them. Because they were scammed. And I was part of it. And I didn't mean it. And I didn't know. I did not know.
So Warning signs of being a chronic victim of these remote scammers. They're secretive about the phone calls. They may be wiring money using prepaid debit cards, all these kinds of ways that we talked about scammers sending that money. They might have sudden problems paying bills. They're borrowing money, might even be using payday loans. They may have a lot of computer problems. They might be declining invitations with family and friends to spend time with this special friend they have. And they're going to lie to you about some or all the above, usually at the request of the perpetrator that they're involved in. And in assisting these chronic victims of financial exploitation, which is what these folks are, if they're involved in these kinds of things, one-time intervention isn't going to work, probably. It's going to be a process in the most cases. Dr. Witty's research says the main psychological trait of victims is that belief in true love or romantic destiny. So you're going to believe that financially sacrificing for your soulmate isn't unreasonable. And you're going to kind of believe this couldn't be a scam because scams aren't as intimate as what I've been experiencing. And the secrecy, the withdrawal, the concerns of family and friends may desert them or try to conserve them or control assets. So there's great fear and consequences in reporting these. So they may lie or refuse to provide that information in the hopes of getting their money back. And again, they're going to be vulnerable to re-victimization. Assessing is going to be a continual process. You really want to begin where the victim is and build rapport first. This is assuming that maybe you've had family members try to do interventions and it hasn't been successful. Victims are very vulnerable at this early intervention stage and they may not identify as a victim. Again, it treated a lot like sometimes the domestic violence, human trafficking kinds of things that you see. They may shut down and refuse to cooperate if they're kind of approached too strongly. Because they're being told by the fraudsters not to tell, or they may be threatened. And you're going to assess for suicidal ideations, threats. Are they a money mule? Is there sextortion involved? Oftentimes, a victim may be hesitant if they're a female to tell a male police officer or an agent that they've been involved in sextortion. And so that's something you really want to, when you feel you can, ask those questions. Resulting images and videos are often used to threaten money and silence. Cultural, religious, medical, cognitive, trauma-informed considerations really important. Does the victim really have and use that natural support system? And because those victims are going to need help as well, those secondary victims. You're going to focus on their strength and establishing connections. You're going to initiate the contacts with them. They aren't going to be the ones calling you. You've got to check in with them. And now that I'm kind of retired, and even while I was working for the FBI, I would often call myself Coach Debbie, which aren't terms you usually want to use when you're dealing with criminal justice system, because we definitely aren't involved in coaching victims. But so few of these cases really ended up in something. And it was more that I was a coach to help them get out of the scam and kind of move forward in their life by focusing on their strengths and their interests. And that's recognizing that relapse is a normal part of the process. And so we'll talk a little bit about the stages of change model. So if they relapse, hey, you different tomorrow, but the important thing is to get them to the point where they're spending money. And if you're lecturing them in the beginning, how likely are they going to want to take your calls or ask for help? So again, working with them so that they do. Help them research with tools like TinEye, do Google reverse image searches, teaching them how to do it, finding stories that are, again, culturally relevant. There is also a lot of really good now online and facilitated support groups. Facebook, I'm actually on 5 or 6 of them that are kind of run by victims. Sometimes the scammers can get in, but the victims themselves are really good at kind of identifying, but they have been really good source of victims helping each other. The National Fraud Helpline, and again, working with family members. And managing and expectations is really important, and holding those predators accountable, reporting to crime. I've had victims say, I filed that report with IC3 and I never heard from anybody. And they don't understand that it's really a library of complaints and that victims more than likely won't, but there are occasions where they will, and that it's really important to hang on to that paperwork just in case they do. And again, be available long-term to them. This is just the kind of you've seen this, the domestic violence power and control wheel. I kind of created another one for intimate partner exploitation. And I added the terms of sextortion, identity theft, installing malware, the recruiting the victim being a money mule. But it really fits a lot of the domestic violence kinds of things that we see with a victim as well. Finding financial assistance and security. If there's no family around or available, who is going to be there to help? Because APS is usually a short-term intervention. Victim services, area agencies on aging, senior centers, multidisciplinary teams, the forensic center referrals can be helpful. But again, these are people that are going to need someone like a coach or a case manager, someone that can be in their life long-term. and we have an answer for that. The creditor and legal interventions, those of you that are on there that can help with that, we used to do for the FBI creditor intervention letters that victims could use. Sometimes your legal aid groups can do judgment proof letters. IRS issues, they're a lot going to have, and there's actually a taxpayer advocate at the IRS that can help sometimes with these, explaining bankruptcy options and free credit counseling, and how do you protect the remaining assets, especially of a surviving spouse if someone is caught up in one of these, and the different ways you can encourage them to identify and close their accounts that may be compromised. And just to be aware, law enforcement and family can put a block on wiring money if they are still using Western Union or MoneyGram, and I have the resources for that in the back. You want to talk about safety plans with them. What are they going to do if that fraudster contacts them again? Or, you know, how are you going to handle that if you get that call or that email or that text? Computer safety practices we'll talk about, and the identity theft precautions. And you don't forget the basic cyber fraud, such as mastery and tech equipment. Again, they may not know how to block the calls. You want to help them, teach them about the two-factor authentication, being mindful of their online profile. Don't include their birthday. Don't include that they're widowed. Make sure that they've locked it down so only friends perhaps can see what they're doing. Don't use the same passwords. Keep their information updated. Use their privacy settings. And I always stress keeping their dating local. If you can't meet someone soon, move on. And don't go off those dating platforms quickly. And then I have some resources there of who they can contact about cyber crimes or computer issues if they can't afford the cleaning for malwares. Here are some of the things that might be helpful for them, some of the agencies. And again, what I urge you to do is spend 15 minutes, because we're coming towards the end, and there's going to be all kinds of links to things. So just get on the computer and spend 15 or 20 minutes going into each of these links that I'm going to be giving you and kind of seeing what's there. The stages of change model, again, it's been used a lot for addictions, changing habits. How many of you have decided to lose weight and you did it the first time that they made that decision? Again, it can be a process to change this kind of behavior. The important part of the stages of change model, though, I think, is being prepared for as people contemplate that they're going to end the relationship, and then they prepare, they take the action, they do it a while, and then there may be a relapse. And relapse is a normal part of that change of behavior. And I think recognizing that is important as people struggle through this. Addressing the trauma responses, counseling are really important issues for this, the shame and guilt that they have. Again, I talked about the online social media groups. There may be grief work, codependency groups, grief support groups, again, prior trauma. There's really a need, though, for free phone or video survivor-based peer support groups to be held weekly. And we actually started those in Los Angeles, as well as up in Ventura County. So the first one, the HEART program, is for people 50 and older that live in Los Angeles County. And this group has been going on for probably 4 or 5 years now. And we've had victims that have been in it for that long, which is kind of neat. And again, it's phone. They've been moving more and more to Zoom now. But I know we've stopped people from being money mules on this group. And I also know that they have saved lives. They also have a closed Facebook group so they can talk to each other. Again, moderated by a licensed facilitator. The second group is done actually through a domestic violence sexual assault program. They are actually open now to any victim in the state of California. And they also offer 10 free counseling sessions, just like any domestic violence or sexual assault victim would have. So this is, and I'm also working to start programs in North Carolina, and been in touch with Virginia and Vermont about starting this. And my hope is maybe in your part of New York, you can get something going in your 6 counties as well. And then I'll let you know there's some national efforts as well. But this is probably the best thing that I can think of, because as professionals, we can't be in their life long term. I mean, victims have my cell phone number and they can call me 24/7, but still it's not the same as having someone that you're checking in with weekly, and you're dealing with other survivors who have been through it in a way that others just really don't understand. So I'm really pushing that agency. And again, you want to include the Federal Trade Commission, the Internet Crime Commission, Internet Crime Complaint Center, and reporting these crimes. Connections equals relationships equals hope. If someone's being scammed, what are you replacing the old behavior relationship with? This is a question I often ask my family members. If this person is spending 3 or 4 hours a day talking to Joe the scammer or Jane the scammer, how are you going to replace that time that they're spending and that attention they're getting from them? Their motivation in getting involved is usually just to be important in a special someone's life. So you have to help them find those connections in other ways and recognize the risk of re-victimization. and polyvictimization, and where to go if they are involved in a crime or if they're not sure what to do. And again, that can be a useful purpose of that weekly fraud support group. Don't give up on them. It took weeks or months to get into it. It may take time to actually leave that. And no matter how old we are, we need a purpose or a reason to get up in the morning. We don't want to let it be the scammers. And to kind of close up, I got another 2 minutes and then 2 minutes on resources, and we'll finish up here. But I love this kind of, this is how I kind of want to end this with you guys.
Is there anything you would want to learn from the internet?
Could you explain a bit about this Facebook something,
Okay.
and you're having to be a friend?
I typed in www.email.com.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Have you ever heard of YouTube?
Yes, I've heard of it, but I have no clue as to what it means.
How many people here have used a computer? Well, we have some teenage volunteers who are willing to teach you how to use the internet.
I think I'm too old.
Hope you have lots of patience, Henry.
Today we're gonna go on Facebook. Do you remember how to get there?
Well, I think I just, no.
All these things that I never even dreamed about.
I love it.
Welcome to a whole new world of information.
Every time we're together, Shura just wants to watch cooking tutorials on YouTube. There's a big game called Minecraft. Maybe we could cook something that looks like one of the characters in Minecraft.
Hi, everybody on YouTube.
We should have you doing a music video.
My teeth are as fresh as hot popped corns, my OG teeth.
All of the other seniors are so inspired, so we're gonna have a contest to see who gets the most views of their YouTube video.
Hello, YouTube.
Hello, YouTube. Hello, YouTube.
Today we are talking about travel.
Music.
Sisterhood.
Million Evelyn's is beating mine. I need more hits on YouTube.
This is the big moment that you've all been waiting for. The first prize, winners of the Cyber Seniors competition, goes to...
We all know how difficult it is to learn something new, but we really do feel that it can change your life.
So you got a friend request from...
Hello, Yeo. Who's he?
He's in the same program.
Hold on a second, you got a message. Sure, Edie.
Hello, Ellard.
Oh, dear.
Look here, Ellard is typing.
Oh, hello, Ellard. Hello, Shura.
Megan said, thank the people who taught you.
You're welcome. Love you. They see a program like this and they think it's an opportunity to get in touch with their grandkids and to communicate.
No matter how old we are, we do need a purpose for getting up in the morning.
So this is actually a video that, a documentary that's out, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that program because I love Cyber Seniors and kind of what they're doing. Finally, I want you to ask one more question. If you've got one of these victims, do you have enough money to pay your rent or mortgage or to buy food or pay utilities? Because often these victims have absolutely no money at all. They're close to eviction. I've had victims sell their car, you know, double mortgage their home, to spend every bit of money they have, sacrificing for this scammer to show up at the airport and of course make things right, which they never do. And finally, I want to kind of go through, these are the resource links, and I'm going to go through this in just 2 minutes because I want you to look at these things on your own, but I want you to kind of know what's here. So you'll all have access and a copy of this stuff. This is kind of, I try to get it on one page. This is my kind of toolkit. This is my links, my resources. Anytime I'm dealing with a romance imposter crime, these are the kinds of resources that I'm going to be providing to the family members or my victims, or making use of myself in dealing with them. And I'll just go through a couple real quickly. The National Labor Fraud Hotline we talked about. Federal Trade Commission has a wonderful kind of article and infographic about what you need to know about romance scams. If you've got military people whose images are being used, the U.S. Army CID has a wonderful page on romance scams telling all the reasons why someone in the military is not going to be asking for money. Someone in the military is not going to be using Gmail or Yahoo for their email accounts. Just some great kind of red flags there. The U.S. Bankruptcy Court, we often don't think about that as a resource. They also have a listing for each state of nonprofit consumer credit counselings that are kind of useful to know in dealing again with credit card issues and things like that. The U.S. State Department, we'll talk a little bit about that one. The IRS Taxpayer Advocate, again, can help. They actually have also a branch that deals with identity theft issues for victims. And of course, on any kind of brochure, handout, or information that I'm giving, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the Crisis Text Line are also really important, as is 211 resources. And if you can get your 211 people trained on these kinds of crimes, that's also a big help as well. State Department actually has warnings and assistance on financial scams, assistance tips. If someone is a U.S. citizen and they claim to be overseas and in need of money, anybody can send money through the U.S. State Department of Overseas Citizen Services Trust, and they can pick up that money at any embassy in the United States. So if someone is really in need of money, and the victim won't stop sending it, you can say, okay, if this person is a U.S. citizen, they can go to the U.S. Embassy and you can actually send money through the embassy and they have to show an ID, a picture ID, or a passport. And of course, our scammers aren't going to be able to do that. Also, any citizen in the United States can get money to get back home, which is often one of the things the scammers will say is, I don't have money to get home, send me money. People can actually get a loan from the U.S. Embassy. Anybody can get a ticket home. If they've lost their passport or have other issues like that. So the embassy is the place to go to if they've got problems, not talking to a victim. Don't be a money mule. Federal Trade Commission, again, great resources there. The new FBI has this whole book on money mules. Don't be a mule campaign. Great little booklet. You can download stuff and give those to victims. The DOJ has this money mule article about sending the warning letters. Better Business Bureau, probably my favorite resource, has this 12 to 14 page report on money mules, on romance scams, on lottery scams, fake check scams, pet scams, you name it. Very, very thorough and very, very good. Connecting with others online safely. I want you to look at these kind of things. The first one I mentioned, of course, is Cyber Seniors, because I love them so much. But a lot of these, University Without Walls is actually in New York, I think. But some of the different programs, especially during this age of COVID, that might be used for APS and other groups to kind of get victims involved in these ways to help replace kind of that role that the scammer had in their life. And again, these are all safe kinds of programs. And again, I just did a screenshot. These are some, you can go back and they have, Cyber Seniors has weekly classes every day of the week where you can learn how to be tech savvy and all these different things. They also have a community chat where victims from literally around the world can sit and talk to each other, and they do exercises. They actually have one-on-one by a phone so that you can link up with a younger person that will tell you how to connect with a certain kind of technology if you're having problems. They also do a lot of partnerships with local organizations. So for your some of your FAST group members or your E-MDT team, it might be really useful to partnership. Really, and they do exercises, all kinds of things. I've actually come to learn about TikTok and stuff myself. So AARP had a great article on ways to spot a romance scammer. I'll kind of go on with that. Baker Fraud Report, I want to mention that. APS and law enforcement, especially on your prosecutors. If you go on the bakerfraudreport.com, that's actually done by Steve Baker, and he was a former Midwest director for the Federal Trade Commission. He's the one that wrote the Better Business Bureau reports, but he does these weekly email reports on transnational fraud crimes. So you'll get the trends, you get recent arrests, you'll see what all local police are doing on these kind of cases, everything from ransomware to BC crimes to romance and every other kind of crime you can imagine. It's just a wonderful report. And again, the Better Business Bureau scams. There's an article that I did with Dr. Landy, who's a forensic psychologist, on transnational scam predators. It talks a lot about responding to victims, some of the same stuff I'm mentioning here. You're welcome to read. And then I just included the MoneyGram and Western Union, ways that you can actually, as law enforcement, APS, or even a family member, stop someone from sending money using Western Union and MoneyGram. So I have some information on that. So that's kind of the end of the presentation. So I'm sorry it kind of went so long, but that's what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. We do have a question in the chat from Kevin Bergenstock, the APS supervisor for Jefferson County. It says, "Hi, Debbie, question for you. We often get victims who tell us, APS, they don't want their family contacted. However, we find they continue to have contact with the perpetrator. The family seems like they would be able to provide more long-term support versus APS. Any suggestions?
So you're asking is what the family should be doing, or I guess I'm not understanding the question.
It says the family seems like they would be able to provide more long-term support that APS cannot provide. Is there anything, any possible information we could?
Well, I think that's what I was kind of giving you. I thought any of these kind of resources here, you know, I would go through, that's why I would surf through each of these kind of things and see what's relevant for that certain situation. Certainly the Better Business Bureau reports can be helpful, or if they're not kind of at that skill level, if they want to read something that's 12 pages long, give them the information from the Federal Trade Commission that's posted on there. Some of the AARP article, it also has some good stuff about that, just to understand the nature of the scams. And then that National Elder Reporting, National Elder Fraud Hotline, I think could be valuable. Having the family member take a look at some of the online kinds of support groups, if they're on Facebook or Instagram, you know, go on there first themselves to make sure they're kind of legit, and then, you know, help that victim, help their family member sign up on those things, and they could just kind of watch and see what other victims are saying. And for a lot of victims, they kind of lurk on there a while, and then they come forward and say, I've been watching this and I realize now this is what I'm involved in too. So again, there's great power in victims helping other victims through some of these online kinds of programs. And I think just being there for support for the family members. Actually, one of my dreams is to also start these kind of Zoom or phone support groups for family members dealing with these things as well, because I think they're kind of victims that have been dealing this often on their own for way too long without us helping.
And thank you so much, Debbie. In case anyone didn't notice, I did put a PDF of this presentation in the chat. I've also emailed it to everyone who's in an E-MDT. If you are a guest today and I don't have your email, I will re-put my own contact information in the chat. In my haste to get to our presenter today, I neglected to introduce myself. I'm kstewart from Catholic Charities, and I am the coordinator for the Elder Abuse Enhanced Multidisciplinary Team for the North Country Hub, which contains Clinton, Essex, Franklin, St. Lawrence, Jefferson, and Lewis counties.
And, just one other thought real quick, it might be something for your E-MDT to decide, you know, are there agencies that are willing to take this on as issues, to be there when APS kind of has to give up the reins depending on the state, or even can't get involved at all. You know, what agencies can be there within your E-MDT that might take this on, and working with the victims and their family members. That when I do these presentations, that's one of the things that often comes out of that, in addition to kind of, you know, trying to figure out how they could put on one of these phone or Zoom support groups, but they usually are finding some agency that's willing to take it on. Family service agencies, it might be a Catholic church, it might be some mental health agency or victim services agency. Domestic violence, sexual assault programs are good bets. They understand a lot of the dynamics. And I think there's going to be changes in Congress and the Office for Victims of Crime soon to kind of fund these victims more. And then finally, again, I really want to encourage you to invite and have your federal partners participate in your MDT teams, because they will bring some of these kind of cases to you, but they'll also bring their expertise. And it's also a way, I think, for detectives to connect with agents, as well as the federal prosecutor that does these kind of crimes. And we'll be very interested in coordinating and doing combined trainings and all kinds of opportunities to kind of recognize these unmet needs and these invisible victims that are in your community that APS is so struggling with alone for the most part. And again, to your police departments, you know, the National Elder Fraud Hotline, have maybe at your police departments, everybody knows if you can't help themselves, at least take that police report if you can. But also, as a police department, have your victims file that report with IC3 and the FTC, and give them the Elder Fraud Hotline number. I mean, do those three things, and you're helping victims immensely just by doing that.
Debbie, do you have a couple minutes to answer any questions?
I can answer. I'm here as long as you need me. Yes.
Is there anyone on the meeting who would like to ask Debbie a question?
Hi, sure. This is Kate from the North Country Hub, Debbie. I'm really fascinated with the money mule aspect of the cyber intimate partner exploitation. We've had some educational information about romance scams, and we've had victims in our MDTs, but not a lot of information about the money mule. Do you consider the victim to be also a perp of a crime in a complicated way? Are the warning letters, for instance, which I don't know anything about, are they warning the victim that they're also a potential criminal?
Yes, and that's kind of the purpose of it, because again, you have kind of witting and unwitting money mules. So you've got the witting money mules are usually the ones that are, the prior criminals, the people that are part of a cell that know what they're doing is wrong and they're doing it for the money, the cut of the money that they often get from doing this. But a lot of victims are kind of recruited to be money mules, not recognizing that that's what they're doing. I have many men and women that are asked to forward the money because it will help help in the business endeavor, or to bring money into the country that the soldier needs to get started or whatever. And victims may actually move from being unwitting and not knowing that's what they're doing to being witting. There's a case example out of a woman and out of Colorado, and I sometimes used to use it a lot on my presentations. But she ended up with like a huge sentence. She and her mother both started out being a romance scam victim, and they ended up finding out that they were victims, but they needed the money. They were so much in the hole financially that they made a deal with the Nigerian scammer to take a cut of the money, and they ended up defrauding and being involved, having other victims send money to them that they would then forward, and they ended up serving considerable time in prison. So people can move from being, unwitting to witting, which is a tough thing to go through. And which is why I think it's so important that we get to them early before that happens. And that warning letter is used for prosecution purposes to give them kind of a fraud notice that you are involved in fraud, and that we do reserve that right to do this. I almost think it could be like a drug court that you have, where people have to check in maybe with a judge once a month or something if they've been involved in something like this. I would love to see, something like that happening, kind of just to stay in touch with them. But I would say if someone's getting a money mule letter and they're more on the unwitting side of it, if you can do intensive victim services with those victims, you're going to hopefully turn them around so that they won't be susceptible to doing this further. Because the letter alone is probably not going to stop too many people. In my opinion, I think it'll stop some, but you've got to have other services there as well.
Thank you.
But we do have lots, like the Oxford Police Department, Santa Barbara Police Department. I can mention several police departments out in the Los Angeles area that have kind of adapted that. A lot of your federal agencies, the FBI is using it, Postal has been using it for a long time, Homeland Security, all the federal agencies kind of have that, and there's actually a federal registry. But local police departments have gotten the idea, and there's actually a copy of the letter that's used by the DOJ that was written by U.S. attorneys in the link that I gave you. And a lot of our DA's offices, like I know in Ventura County, the DA just kind of took a look at the letter, our elder abuse coordinator, and said, yeah, sure, Oxnard Police Department, go ahead and use this. So, get the approval of your local prosecutor, but, go for it. If it's going to help stop someone, you want to do it, or put them on warning. Because a lot of folks don't have any idea what they're doing is committing a crime. They may feel, not real good about it, but they don't know. And if your boyfriend's telling you it's okay, baby, and this is the way we can be together, you want to believe that.
Yeah, that video that you showed really illustrated that, her conflicting emotions and terrible dismay and regret.
And that's the point at which that intervention is starting to happen with natural systems like the bank or somebody. That's the point at which they're going to need our help and support. So they're not just hearing from the offender saying, oh, don't believe them, honey, they don't understand. Or, I've had people say that they're with the CIA or Department of Defense or these kind of things. And, I'm bigger than what the local police are doing. They don't know. So you got to get in there and at that point of intervention, be there for so strong support. And you got to be the one to initiate the contact with them because they're often not going to be calling you. They're too ashamed. I've had victims, I'll just mention this. My agents used to crack up going by my office because when I'm dealing with these victims, and I kind of had an underground railroad, so it was more than just our cases. I would get a lot of referrals from APS. I still get from all over the country, actually. And I'd be on the phone with victims, and sometimes I could get them, I would use music and I would just sing a song. And, you know, if it's lottery scams, it might be Hit the Road, Jack. And I tell a victim, when you get that call from that scammer, you're going to tell him, sing in your mind, hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more. And for romance scams, I might be talking with the victim and I say, okay, let's sing the song. I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair. Or I'm going to sing, you know, I am woman, I am strong. Or, you know, just I will survive, or some of those kind of songs where you get victims to kind of sing those things with you. And I'll try to use that as part of the relationship and rapport building I have with them. But I've actually had victims several months later say, Debbie, I just wanted to check in with you. I'm having a bad day. I'm feeling like I'm missing him. I think I just need to hear that silly song again. And so we'll sing the silly song, you know, whatever it is. But just so that they have other places to go to. And that's what I love about Cyber Seniors, just the different programs and the different ways of having to connect with people safely, and the online support groups, finding those replacements to give those people hope and a reason to want to live, you know, and share that kind of intimacy with others safely.
And Debbie, the two different support groups that you shared, which are listed in your PowerPoint, those are also very helpful, I would imagine, with victims seeing that their situation isn't unique, and that they, you know, they start to believe that, you know, yes, this is a scammer. Yes, this isn't someone that really loves me, because this is exactly the same thing that happened to, you know, 50 other people in my group.
Yeah. And of course, the groups are smaller. And what's cool about it, again, is, and some of the people that have been in the groups for like a year or 6 or more, when we've had victims in there for 2 and 3 years, they love it when they get a new victim in that's just joined the group, because they can kind of talk them through it and help them understand in ways, again, that those of us that haven't been through it, we're just on a different level. It's just a different level. So it's wonderful support.
Debbie, there's another question in the chat from Brenda Burgoyes. If you know this, what is the ratio of female victims in romance scams?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I have the statistics on that. Let me also say this first. While the trend, excuse the dog. While the trend is for those probably, well, what we've seen historically is people 50 and older. I would say that there is a trend of younger people getting caught up in these as well. The trend for men versus women, I think it's probably more women are caught up in it, but men get caught up in it sooner. And of course, with many men, it's much more overtly sexual than I think it is for women. Where images are shared, a lot of with men, it's coming out of places like Eastern Europe and Russia and the Philippines. And again, there's sextortion much more involves faster. And again, I'm collecting suicides on some of those, because as word comes out on those, there's unfortunately suicides. I have an amazing story of a woman talking to her son. One of the things, committed suicide in Colorado. Again, hard for these families and just not being recognized for victims. It's pretty horrific.
Lorena Greenhill would like to share a story with everybody.
Hi guys. I just wanted to share that everything that Debbie has touched on, I think I've experienced at some point or another. I've experienced dealing with the romance scams, the reshipping scams. I had one incident of people who were money movers. Once they became aware, or I tried to explain to them what they were involved in, it stopped at that time. And it seemed like a lot of these types of cases I dealt with a lot in like the 2010, 2011, 2012 era. And the common denominator in a lot of it was the use of Western Union. And Western Union at that time did not take a lot of culpability in trying to prevent these types of things. And I was extremely frustrated with Western Union at that time. But one particular case that I dealt with where in 2011, this gentleman, he got scammed. It was an internet buying, he was buying like an ATV from another state. And he ended up sending a couple different Western Union money orders and never got his product, came to me. And so through these cases I had worked through before, I had already become familiar with the FTC website and the IC3.gov website. And in working with him, encouraged him to make a report to those websites. And in addition to working with Western Union as far as getting them all the information that they needed, what they were doing in the back end, I don't know. But so that's a case that started in 2011. September of this year, this is 9 years later, this gentleman's caregiver, he's now 81. She brought in a letter that he had received, and it was from the Department of Justice. And at first, because he was a little shy from being scammed here, he was not sure if he was getting scammed again, because there was a check in there for almost the exact amount of money that he had lost in his 2011 loss with Western Union. And as I read this, because at that time I was not aware that Western Union was part of this class action suit that the government had pursued, and he got all. I said, I think this is a legitimate thing. And so just the effort of him doing that for himself and me having that information. I mean, this was 9 years ago, and here 9 years later, he's being made whole by this. I mean, you just never know what's going to happen when you pursue these things. And he now at 81, because over the years he would reach out to me to see if there's made any progress. And of course, I know that there's no progress that I can make on this. But I had never seen somebody be made whole like that. And I was thrilled for him because a lot of people don't get restitution in most crimes anyways, let alone this type of crime. But I just wanted to share that that making the reports, I don't know if it was the report itself to the feds that helped him get his money. I gotta believe that it was, but I just wanted to share that with you. That 9 years later, this guy got his money back.
It's a wonderful story, and I spent all Christmas season one year just on my off hours, coming in weekends, of every victim that I had talked to that I still had addresses on, because again, I dealt with much more than my regular caseload, and made sure I got a letter out that was approved by the FBI to send, telling them about the 2 lawsuits that were out there, and encouraging, actually having an application form that they could mail in themselves for my victims. And I heard from people, again, that I hadn't heard from in 5 or 10 years, that I haven't got my money yet, Debbie, you know, and this is a poor guy, 95 years old now. And I'm like, oh, I hang in there. I hope you will. And it was just a great way, I think. And that's why you don't hear about Western Union and MoneyGram that much anymore, being used as a means for money being sent that way. So the scammers, again, are using the gift cards, and you're going to increasingly see Bitcoin. And you may even want to do a future presentation sometime on investigations involving Bitcoin, because it is the wave of the future. Victims have no idea that that's what they're investing in, or and often it goes tech support to lottery scam to romance scam to business investment with Bitcoin, the same victims. So, you know, it's happening. That they change their trends. They change again. They're targeting now younger people on these kinds of things than they were before. Disabled folks also very much at risk, because on the computer they're as so-called normal as anyone else. So they're often very much at risk. I've had 2 or 3 victims. Actually, one of the support groups now that does the Zoom support group has someone that is a developmentally disabled woman that's participating in the group. She was involved in a romance scam. So again, I think this is great outreach. And again, what I love about it, we can't be in their lives in the way we want to be to replace that sense of loss or just that time that they spend. And if they can spend it with people who have been through a similar experience, my victims look forward to that. And the woman that leads the group in Ventura, she does counseling for all kinds of sexual assault and domestic violence. running this group weekly is her favorite group that she does. She said the women are just so entertaining, and I think they've had one man on there. So entertaining. The one thing I found, and I'll talk about the difference in the sexes, it does seem like using the word support group, you're probably going to get more women. I think men just kind of, a lot of times you say support group, they're like, well, I don't need anything like that. So one of the things I've kind of recommended is maybe you change it to a cafe, or just kind of survivor cafe, or just something like that, so that it's less kind of mental healthy, to kind of get men maybe more involved in these kinds of things, or older men. But getting them involved in classes and chances to connect with people online in a safe way, especially during this COVID times, can be, I think, a really useful thing that those of you doing direct services can do, and take from my list and come up with your own. But Cyber Seniors is a great way to go, and some of those other programs too.
Thank you so much, Debbie. And I did record 99% of this presentation, and there were only 2 times when we had a little bit of tiny little bit of an audio issue, but what you were saying was actually on the PowerPoint, so I don't believe that anything was missed.
Okay.
So that was really amazing. Is there anyone else who has any other questions for Debbie today?
I do, Casey.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I heard someone say, I do, Casey, and then they disappeared. Oh. Let me see.
And you guys feel free to check in if I can be of help on any of these kind of international scams. But again, look to some of your federal people and get them on your team, because they can be really helpful too.
Oh, Debbie, there is one more question in the chat from Brenda Burgoyes, and this is to everyone. Do you have, like, what percentage of romance scams do you believe that may go unreported?
Most.
Most of it?
Yeah, and I'd say that, again, having done romance scams for, I think my first one I remember getting is like 2003, so I'm going way back when the internet was new. But just being online now and seeing some of the group support stuff, I'm seeing the number of victims, they're from all over, not just the United States, but many, many, many of them have not reported and are afraid to. And the problem is sometimes they even file that report, but it's not a useful report. It's that kind, like I said, where Casey just said, I had 100,000 stolen by my scammer, period. And that's it. That's not a useful report that's going to help law enforcement in any way, or even help with statistics. So I think most go unreported. I don't think we have any idea of what that number is.
Right. Well, I know in elder abuse, as it in regards to financial exploitation, the current scholarship says that only 1 in 44 cases.
44 cases, yes.
So,
and the other thing, if you're a member of NAPSA, we do kind of a weekly scam call-in, Steve Baker and I, and the next one is tomorrow. So if you're a member of NAPSA, you can get in on that. I think through the NAPSA website, there's information on that that can help with that information.
okay, great. Somebody just called in with the number 0533. Were you the person who had the question just before you got cut off?
Yes, thank you, Casey. It's Megan in the North Country. You know how our service is. So I got cut off.
Great. Did you still want to ask your question?
Yes, please. My question for Debbie is in reference to our customers who fall into becoming victims of romance scams. I'm more commonly seeing them come in with checks from FedEx. And when you were speaking about Western Union, my question is, does that same law apply or categorize with FedEx? Do they usually follow that as well? And most FedExes, for example, when I send out a FedEx for a loan closing that I conduct, I have a tracking number on that. So those FedExes that come to those customers and those checks are FedEx to them, wouldn't those tracking numbers be able to lead us to who the perpetrator is and be able to hold them accountable and more quickly?
That's probably a question more for, and again, maybe trying to get a postal inspector in on your group. I'm not sure I can answer that question because that's more an investigative thing. I do know that FedEx and counterfeit checks and fake checks are just a really big thing that happens. And of course, victims don't understand that they're going to be held responsible for that. There, you see a lot of, and Better Business Bureau has a whole report on this about fake checks. And I urge you to kind of look at that, especially with overpayment, where you pay a certain amount and then that extra money you send back and you never, of course, get that back. The FedEx, I also believe, is caught up in, I've seen a lot of people getting texts now where they're told that there's a delivery for them when they didn't really ask for anything. And I can send to Casey some information by the postal inspectors that they just put out on that. I just recently sent it to my FAST group that might address some of that issue. But I would think if there's a number, but the problem is you're probably going to get a money mule, someone that doesn't really understand that's what they were doing, or sometimes it might be sent from a fake address. But again,
correct.
I would
Sometimes
report those
they come
things
from a fake address.
I would report those things to the Federal Trade Commission and the Internet Crime Complaint Center too, so they're aware that that's a local crime.
Okay.
And you might also want to talk to. I know FedEx has people that you can talk to. Their security people. It might be something to get them involved. Just hit the right department with FedEx. Their fraud and security department.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions for Debbie? All right. Well, I'm sure that everyone, and not just me, is really thrilled that you could come to be with us today, Debbie, at 3 hours earlier than we have. So I appreciate Debbie worked with me this morning at 5:30, or her 5:30 this morning, to make sure all of her tech stuff was working. So I really appreciated her coming and sharing this information with you all. And I just wanted to remind the St. Lawrence E-MDT that our next meeting will be Wednesday, January 13th at 9 a.m. And I will resend out today's agenda with the correct date for our tentative schedule for 2021, not 2010. And I'll give you one last chance if anyone wants to say anything to Debbie, and I'll let everybody go.
Thank you all for what you do.
Fantastic
so much.
presentation. Fantastic.
Overwhelming. Thank you. Very interesting.
And I can resend the PowerPoint to anyone who needs it. And I also do have, I sent it to you all a week or two ago, but I can also resend the information on the romance scam support groups and IC3 and the Federal Trade Commission.
And then I'll send you the stuff about this package delivery scam too, that's put out by the post office. So you can get that out in your next email too.
That would be perfect. And I'll wait until you do that, and then I'll send everything in one fell swoop so you don't get email barrage.
But good luck, you guys, and anything I can do to help you, I'm here, especially to get this group started.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks. Have a great rest of your day, Debbie.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Does anyone have anything that they wanted to tell me or need to know just E-MDT wise before I close the meeting? Okay.
Diana?
Yes.
Will we be able to get a copy of the recording?
I am hoping so. This is the first time I've ever recorded anything on Zoom, and I just have to figure out how to retrieve said recording and send it out to anyone who would like it. If anyone has recorded on Zoom and knows how to do that already and would like to stay on the line with me to tell me how to do it, that would be much appreciated. Otherwise, my Zoom room will be open until I can figure it out. But yeah,
thank you,
Mr. Diana. You'll definitely get it.
Awesome, that'd be great.
Thank you. It was a lot of information in rapid fire succession. So.
I have done that, Casey. I did a financial literacy that I recorded. I don't exactly remember, but there'll be a file. The problem is it's very, very large. So I'm not sure you'll be able to send it via email.
Okay. So what I might be able to do is schedule an impromptu review, like reviewing of it, and open a meeting have a Zoom meeting where the people who couldn't come to this one or who would like to review the information can do so. That seems like
you might be able to do is use a like Dropbox or something like that, where you can upload it to somewhere.
Okay.
In YouTube, and then you could watch it that way. Because the one I did was for youth summer youth employment, and what I ended up doing was putting it on a memory stick and hand delivering it, so they could use it.
Did it like so when I said okay, I'm going to pause.